Every man in the village owned a pair of hobnailed boots. The footprints told no tales. Still, Morwenna hunted, occasionally pausing to call the dogs and keep them close at hand for comfort more than protection. More splintered wood or fragments of fabric, a dislodged button, even strands of hair held the potential for identification of someone. The flotsam remained void of identifying objects, save for lingering odours of rum, salted fish, the stinging stench of tar. Everything with even remote value had been picked clean. Later, men, women, and children would arrive on the beach to haul away whatever was useful to use as firewood, or bits of canvas to patch a hole in thatched roofs. When the mines closed, as those on Penmara had, families went hungry and cold. If she could find a way to reopen the mines, the villagers wouldn't resort to crime to survive. She lifted her gaze from the tide line to the remains of the vessel, one of its two masts sticking out like an accusing finger. No doubt some enterprising souls had waded or taken a boat out to the shattered hull to ensure nothing and no one remained aboard. For those sailors who had not drowned, dead men told no tales. Morwenna said a prayer for the families of the men who had died by either the hand of nature or the hand of men. She knew all too well the anguish of being left behind. She trudged the last 100 feet of the beach. Waves swooped in, one or two high enough to dampen her cloak and gown. With each step, her heart grew heavier until it felt like a lump of cold lead in her middle. She reached the end of Penmara land, where an outcropping of rock separated the Penmara beach from Half Moon Cove below Bastion Point, her grandparents' home. The incoming tide nearly blocked the strip of sand that allowed one to enter the cove from the beach and the entrance to a maze of caves beneath. Some of those caves ran beneath Penmara. If anyone grew suspicious about the coincidence of yet one more shipwrecked on her beach, they would likely find goods from the vessel stored in those caves, just enough to ensure she took the blame. She kicked at a bundle of rags at the edge of the surf and turned away from the sea, calling the dogs to her side. They galloped to her like ponies, their tongues lolled out of happy puppy grins, and Morwenna braced herself for the impact of a dozen stone worth of dog love. But they didn't throw themselves at her. At the last moment, they swerved toward the tide line and began to snuffle at the bundle of rags, once fine wool, now waterlogged, possibly considered too damaged from salt water to be useful to anyone. Truly? When men and women stuffed newspapers beneath their shirts for warmth, even water-stiffened wool useless? Her heart began to thrum like war drums in her chest. "Come away from there, you two!" She clapped her hands at the dogs to get their attention above the rising surf. A wave foamed over the bundle. The dogs backed up, snorting from snouts full of seawater. Then, when the surf receded, they darted right back to poke and sniff at the bundle with muzzles and massive paws. Suddenly certain of what the bundle of rags contained, Morwenna lunged toward the dogs. "Oggie, pasty enough!" Oggie, the male hound, grasped a mouthful of woolen cloak and began to pull. "Oggie, no, drop!" The last word choked in her throat. The body had just moved without assistance from the dogs. "Dogs, sit!" Morwenna grasped the hound's leather collars and hauled them away from the body. "I said sit. Now stay." They obeyed her this time, perhaps sensing an urgency in her tone. Their bodies quivered, but they remained at the head of the tide line while Morwenna returned to the lump of sodden wool and dropped to her knees. Sand and rising seawater soaked through her gown in icy tendrils. She shivered, but ignored the discomfort. She would suffer more if she didn't inspect whether or not the incoming tide had caused the illusion, or if she really had seen a hand emerge from the folds of a cloak. "Madame?" She scanned the length of the figure, realised it was half submerged beneath a sheet of canvas, and corrected herself. Sir, can you hear me?" Nothing happened. No sound of a response rose above the gentle roar of the surf. The dogs whined from their position at the edge of the tide line. Morwenna brushed aside a tangle of water-blackened hair and touched the man's face.